This is an interview with Terry Domschke, retired faculty member of Elgin Community College. Terry was the director of the theater as well as a teaching faculty member in both theater and English. This interview is being conducted on July 14th at Elgin Community College. The interviewer is Polly Nash and the videographer is Jack Weiss. Thank you so much. And I hope it's okay if I call you Terry.
Oh, yes, it's fine.
I appreciate so much your agreeing to be interviewed and sharing with us your history with Elgin Community College. May we start out with a little bit about your background?
Sure, love to. This gives me a chance to talk about nearly half of my life here at ECC. I did part-time after I left, full-time teaching. So I've invested a lot of time, and I'm really grateful to have the opportunity to talk about a very valuable part of my life. But earlier than that, I'm a Midwestern boy, and I really like the Midwest. I was born in St. Louis, Missouri, and very grateful to be half of the South and half of the North, because the attitudes in St. Louis are very different from Chicago, and you have both the slow quality of the South that has spawned so much literature and so many dramas, and the fast pace of the North right beyond. So I had a combination of that. Further than that, I'm half American and half German, I feel, because that was St. Louis, half German, half American. And therefore, when I arrived in Elgin, Elgin is very much like old St. Louis, a brick town, a very German town. You can still see the inscriptions on some of the churches in Elgin in German, and that was a very important part of my life too, although I didn't realize that till I traveled to Europe. But nonetheless, it's fun to be talking about my background. Well, my mother put us on stage at an early age, so I did tap dancing from when I'm a wee boy. But later on, we did ballroom dancing, exhibition dancing in St. Louis. And one of the big events was, when we were teens, we got to dance on the Admiral excursion boat, which went up and down the Mississippi. Now, that had several decks, so there was gambling on it at the bottom, but also there was a 2-story nightclub in the very top where you could look over the Mississippi River and see everything. And they had big bands there, and we got to dance exhibition dances there for adult audiences, but we weren't allowed to drink or anything like that. So, but at any rate, that was so much fun. And I thought when I was finished with my high school days and all, that would be finished with too. I'd divorce myself from theater, and that would be it. And so I decided then I was going to go to a little Principia College is overlooking the Mississippi River, so again, the Midwest, and it was very nice, and I decided to do a course which would lead me to the diplomatic service, but I didn't realize everything involved in it. So I ended up going to Europe before anything came about. I didn't take any tests or anything, and experienced Europe 3 years on my own. And so at that point, I thought that was good enough. So after college, having been trained to be a diplomat, I decided not to. I decided to experience it on my own as a vagabond. So I graduated a half year sooner because I took extra classes, and I crossed the ocean on a merchant liner. And that was great fun, except for the 5 nights of typhoon that we had there. It was a North Atlantic. I don't know that they call them typhoons, but the North Atlantic was really upset at that time. So finally, I got to Rotterdam, and the deal was that, and I crossed, believe it or not, for that time for $100. That was my passage. Everybody spoke German. I didn't speak German much at that time. So that was a big introduction to Germany.
And what year was that?
That was 1962 and 3, just into that. So I got off at Rotterdam. A friend of mine met me, and then ensued about 2.5 to 3 years in Germany and Holland and But I lived in Germany for that time, had 14 jobs, saw Europe from a different perspective than most people do, traveled up and down the Rhine River. I got involved in theater again there, however, and I acted in a German-American theater company in Munich for America House. And I also was privileged to find a job with Deutsche Shell, which is a subsidiary of Shell Oil, as they were doing a film on Abwasser, or sewage water, in the Rhine. So I am one of the few American tourists who have toured Germany with an eye to water quality, and I've seen all the wastewater and everything. They've improved so much since then. But nonetheless, that was part of my experience. I washed windows in 3 cities, Hamburg, Wiesbaden, and Munich, and I had a total of 14 jobs altogether. And sometimes I took $500 with me. I made all the rest of the money on the market over there with those jobs, went to the university, did the Deutsch course for Ausländer at that time. And really, the reason I'm telling you this is I learned a lot about theater, a whole lot about theater, because I was hanging out with theater people. And it was a different perspective than the United States would have given me. It wasn't the star system. It was we work really hard as a theater group. We don't work as stars, and we don't work for stardom. We work for the group, we work for the play, we work for the author. And the director is kind of the center of this and foments all these people and inspires their imagination. So I had a good director friend, and I learned a lot there, and I did a lot of acting. So what happened for me was that I got invaluable experience to what I would later pursue here at ECC, and used a lot of my experience here to build what I considered a worthwhile program. Now I do want to share a few things because it's a prelude to later on when I talk about the theater here. I had a very good actor friend who said to me, on finding me reading a silly play, he said, "Why are you reading that? That's second-rate material." He said, "There is so much first-rate material that you don't have time in your life to even read a fragment of that. Don't spend any time on second-rate material. It has to be very good material to spend the time with it." And I've always used that in my classes here and in my theater experience here. And that led me to choosing plays that had not only ability for actors to grow, but had some philosophical background, some intellectual power to it, so that they could get something more out of a play than just learning how to do an aside to the audience. So hence I loved it when I did, and ECC gave me full freedom to do whatever I wanted to do. And so this is why I congratulate them. I did Molière and Shakespeare and Brecht and Beckett and UNESCO and Pinter and anything that had, and Tennessee Williams, so many fine playwrights. And I thought, this is truly, although actors may not grasp the total of these things, they might do the best job, but they will learn something from these plays that they will never forget, that they can't get anywhere else. So one of the appeals for me of ECC was, at that time, ECC in the late 60s didn't really have a theater program. They did a play every now and then. And I happened to get in one the first year I was here. So this started.
You were here in 1966?
Yes, 1966 in the fall, I think. Yeah, it was 1966 in the fall. And one of the teachers here who wasn't here after that year, Janice, her name was, but I can't remember her last name. She was casting a play, and it was The Lark by Jean Anouilh, and I happened to get the part of Warwick. So I was back in the theater here before I knew it, although I wasn't hired to do that. And now you said something, and I'll talk about that a little more, because that started me thinking about ECC in drama. But you asked me something about hiring practices at that time.
Could you tell us how and why you came to Elgin and how you were hired at the college?
Yes, I would
a little
love.
bit about that whole process. I think.
Yes, it was truly 60s for sure, because there were no committees. I don't know if there'd been a committee. Had I might not have been here, but I had finished my graduate studies, and I had.
Where did you go to school?
Indiana University, and I came up here because I wanted to get a job in Chicago, and it wasn't a teaching job that I wanted, and I had never thought about teaching, frankly. I really did not know that I would really love it, and I was going to either get a job here in Chicago or stay at the RCA factory in Bloomington, Indiana, and be with my friends. So I came up here, and it was pretty sad. There was nothing available that I could do at that time without further training. And so what happened was one of my friends at graduate school in English had given me a hint. She had an appointment in Elgin, and she said, well, I can't take this appointment in Elgin, and you're going to Chicago. I said, where is Elgin? And she said, well, it's just west of Chicago. And if you don't find anything there, at least call them and tell them I'm not coming, or take my appointment. And I took her appointment. And it was with Dean Chipman. And it was very interesting.
So you came in and said, my friend can't take the appointment.
Yes, and I have the slip from the employment service. And it was a week before school took up. And they needed a teacher. I came out, interviewed with Dean Chipman, and we hit it off famously. And went to dinner and spent a couple of hours chatting. And I happened to talk with him about just the right things. He was a fan of the Dresden firebombing, and of Europe in the World War setting. And I had visited all those places, and we had a long talk. And then he had taught down near Alton, Illinois, so he knew that place, that area. That college is now closed, but he had been teaching down there. We talked about Illinois and Southern Illinois and Missouri. And he said, well, we need somebody. He said, do you want to take the job? I said, yeah. When do I start? He went to the bookstore right away, pulled the texts. And here I had, freshman composition texts. And I read it on the train. There was a train from Indiana to Chicago at that time. So I went back to Bloomington. I packed all my things and read this text and tried to put together a package to teach when I got back. So I did arrive in time for the meeting, and Gail Shadwell, you wanted to know who was coming in at that time. Gail Shadwell was coming in. Jane Lehman came a year later. It was that era.
Right.
And Gail was teaching speech at a little place called, it was a business college on the upper floor, and I was teaching composition in Renner Hall.
Business college?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, downtown, right next to the Lutheran Church. And I taught composition across town in the basement of the now defunct and raised YMCA. And so you could smell the chlorine whenever you taught. It was in the basement.
Oh, from the swimming pool?
Yeah, they had a swimming pool there at the time on the end, yes. And swimming classes for ECC were over there. So I met the swimming coach and chatted with him when he was there.
There were a number of classes in the basement
Yes.
of the YMCA.
There were about 3 or 4 classrooms down there.
And do you remember who else was on the faculty when you came?
Yes. Max von Isser. Of course, Imogene Smith was very crucial in taking me into her care, and she taught me a lot of things about teaching. There was another, let's see, who else was there at the time? Did I say Max von Isser was
Yes.
here? Okay. And Gus Stewart, and a lot of the good old guys who had started the school from the high school. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of like being in touch toward ECC in its early stages. And of course, Renner Hall was right across from the high school. that they had taught in. So I learned a lot about teaching from those people, and they were responsible for me staying in Elgin as long as I did, because I think Jack might remember, but I certainly remember the wonderful homey feeling that they presented. Imogene would have soirees in the evening, and Irma Davis would come, and and Ray and many of the other, Tom Youngren would eventually join, and so we had a wonderful little family here, and that was the reason I didn't leave. So I looked at another college. I thought it'd be nice to be in a little private Midwest college, but and I almost applied, but I decided I'd stay here. So that was quite a formative time for me, and that first year was an eye-opener, to say the least.
So you were teaching all freshman composition?
I was teaching all freshman composition classes and doing the play in the evening. And it was a ton of paperwork. I remember I was living at the hotel. What was the name of the hotel? It's still downtown there. I can't remember what the name was, but I was at the hotel scrawling papers for all hours, and I didn't realize how much of a load I'd have with all composition courses. Eventually, I discovered that there were no permanent theater courses. So having had a lot of training, I simply suggested I start that in tandem with the English department, and eventually we became an element of our own. But that was an interesting time. And it was kind of neat because when you change classes, you would go out and walk through Elgin to another building. Sometimes I'd have to come back to Renner Hall, sometimes to the Masonic Temple where the library was. The nursing chapel was an occasional location later for rehearsals. It was just really an interest. It was like a little campus. And
very spread out.
Very spread out, very spread out. And then you could easily go downtown for lunch, and sometimes the students would join you for lunch. That was nice. That was really, everything was in walking distance.
So tell me about the process of putting together a brand new department, a theater department. What was involved, and how did that go?
Well, it was very easy to do with the English department because they wanted more in the literature area, and I started with drama lit class, and then there was call by the students for an actual performance class. So that's when rehearsal and performance was started, which I don't know if it still exists or not, but then we added other classes to that slowly so that it just kind of all worked out. And Elgin was very generous at that time. I think I had told you that Hemmons offered their space unpaid by us. I'm losing the name of the guy who did it. His last name was Smith. And he was a wonderful manager down there. He just invited us in, and we did several plays down there with all that wonderful equipment. And that was a dream. We also worked, our first little show was just a one act by Samuel Beckett, Endgame. And we went to Dr. Renner, who was the president at that time, and I said, I don't have money to paint the set. We borrowed and stolen everything else. Larkin High School was giving us a classroom free, and we want to do a one act there. Can I have $22 for a gallon of paint? So the first budget at DCC for me for theater was $22.
$22.
And we did that, and we had that over there a couple of weekends. And then Elgin Academy also offered us later when we got a little more well-heeled. And as I mentioned to you before, Jane Schaefer and I did a couple of musicals together. And one of them was The Boyfriend. And we went over to Elgin Academy and borrowed their theater space too for a very nominal fee. And they let us use their sets and their stage. And we did a very fun show, The Boyfriend, there. That was the first musical that
So
we
did
did.
Elgin High not have any space available?
We never did contract with them. We went to, the space was so nice and adaptable at Elgin Academy. Later on, I did a T.S. Eliot, the cocktail party there as well, and a few other things. And now they have their own theater space, a nice black box of their own. But they were having their shows in the Sears Gallery, which was really a nice place to do it. And I did several other things for Elgin Community Theater over there, including a couple of Tennessee Williams plays there. It fit. And so that, we worked around town, let's say, to say the least.
So not only did you teach all around town,
yes,
but you put on plays
all around town.
In different places.
In different places, yes.
So can you share some of the anecdotes about strange and wonderful or strange and odd things that happened as you were performing all around town?
Well, yeah. Well, one of the things that happened, we needed a replacement for Endgame, but one of the major guys in there was sick, and another guy took over, and his name was Wayne, and I don't remember all their names, but I remember them clearly. This guy is in a wheelchair, and he's blind, so he has glasses on, so it was an easy switch. He had a blanket over his legs, so all we did was sit up there. He would look down. So one of the performances was completely read by this one character. So that was neat. And I think there was one time we had a very sensitive girl in the show. We did Antigone, and we did that on stage. We had huge doors, Greek doors, and we'd set shields around. And the girl who was playing the queen always was complaining, and she would stage little dramatic things. Well, in a performance, she managed to, as the gates opened up, faint, dead away. She didn't realize that our group would just come right out. The warriors and the other people stepped right over her. They shut the gates, and I helped her up. And I said, "You can't do this in this show. You can't play these games." So we had a lot of fun. It was a wonderful group of kids back then.
Right.
And I know you've asked a question later about the 60s and the students. Well, these kids were really wonderful workers. We'd get together and do the programs. We'd get together. I had no help at that time. We couldn't afford anything. So we borrowed from all around town. We borrowed, I don't know how many years and how many furniture pieces I borrowed from people in town. And we had, I don't know if Jack remembers Marv Schneider or Mark Leischer or any of Harold Yee or any people that came from that time. But they were gung-ho. And we spent a weekend at a person's basement doing the program and Xeroxing that. We did everything, the makeup, everything. And did the music, the lighting. Don Smith was his name, the guy at Hammond's.
From Hammond's.
Yes, Don Smith. And he would help us with the lighting. But basically, the kids did the whole show all themselves and had the time to do it and the enthusiasm to do it. And it was really just the spirit of the 60s, I'll tell you. People just pitched right in, and they did not complain, and they did not ask for anything beyond just the experience of being together. I know most of these people even today. And you know Michael Sprague, of course, and he and I are still friends 45 years later. So, and Marv Schneider, he's in, I know many of the places these people ended up. And many of them ended up at least partly in theater. So that was a wonderful time. And I prized that beyond, it's wonderful to have this facility after doing all that yourself for all these years. I was tired of doing that. And for so many years.
Yeah, so if we can talk just a little bit about because we are in the Visual Performing Arts Center
Right.
now, but there was a time in 1970 when
Yes.
when we moved out to the new campus, we
Yes.
did not have the Visual Performing Arts Center.
Exactly.
So can
Yeah,
you talk a
exactly.
little bit about that time when we
Yes.
came to the new Spartan campus?
We did get a lot. We did have a place here, the A Auditorium. It was small, but so are many, many storefront theaters in Chicago, small. And we were able to put on cabaret, one of the many times I've done cabaret here. And we were able to do even a restoration comedy with all the fittings. We were able to do Biederman and the Firebugs, a German play. We were able to do so much in there, and including a wonderful performance of Oh Coward, which are a No Coward review. Ellen Fritsch was our pianist at that time, and she was the musical director. Sylvia Grady was in it, by the way. So we had a lot of fun doing work in that room.
But with the A Auditorium, you
Yeah.
didn't have a backstage,
No, we had to use the music room.
right?
And we had one closet for all our props, the prop closet, which is, and we always had a lot in there. And, we pulled it out. We had people doing our costumes at that time. So we had materials in there and everything. It was a small closet. It was piled. We built shelves in there. So we did a lot of work from that room.
So the creativity index was really high.
Oh, it was. There was nothing you could do but that. If you wanted to be in theater, you had to do it. And it reminds me of the history of theater is like that. It's ragtag and pull it together and fly by the seat of your pants. And then we used the lounge a couple of times. We put a set in there. And fortunately, the furniture was modern, so we just moved it around and had our set. But there was always the carpet, so we could never change that. But at any rate, and at that time also, Jane Schaefer was here, and we were doing more work together, doing the madrigals. And I did the blocking, and she did the singing, and we ordered the meal and had students
Can you
serving.
give your audience a little bit of information about the madrigal?
Oh, yes. A madrigal is a festive holiday situation modeled after the Middle Ages and their celebrations. So there'd be a roasted pig and, all the things that you could imagine would be in a medieval feast. And then Jane Schaefer would train her students to sing Christmas carols that would access that time. And we would then have costumes made in Elizabethan style or a little earlier. And we'd have bag ladies come in and collect money for charities and things. So it was a little bit.
And so you trained the
I trained the actors, yes. Okay. And they had little things that they would say to the audience. And then we had a lot of students who joined in and did the serving too.
So it was a student and faculty production?
Yes, student and Jane and I.
Okay.
That was
faculty.
Two faculty. And she was equally excited by these things and put a lot of energy in. So we had quite a good pairing at that.
And that lasted about how many years?
I think that lasted 3 years. And when Pete Martinez came in, we changed it to a Victorian dinner.
Okay.
But I still did the staging, and he did a little different presentation. It was a more Charles Dickens type thing at that point. So we had two different events happening. But that was always a lot of fun and got a lot of people involved.
You were for a long time in just the Building A and A
Yes.
Auditorium, and then you were able to use other venues within A Auditorium. But then at
Yes.
one point, the college built what they called Building D, that had a
Yes.
larger stage and auditorium.
And
were you able to use that?
Absolutely. It was a breath of fresh air for me. It actually had rake seating, and it still does, of course. And we did an unprecedented thing because of the school's fastidiousness when it came to theater. Now, the theater was never meant to be a nice, neat teaching thing that you do in a classroom. It's not that way. It's just not. And you understood that when you took over. And Gail understood that. But basically, it annoyed people that we would have all this going on in the hallways.
What was going on in the hallways?
Sets. And you remember Tom Letourneau, you were there at this time. And the hallways would be filled with sets. And we had one area, now that they took the closet away, but they gave us the loading dock. And one interesting story was that one summer, we did No No Nanette, and I have a poster here of some of the things. And No No Nanette was interesting because we cast that colorblind at that time, and we had Loretta Patton was a wonderful black singer and a very good actress. And I thought, no, I can't waste that talent in the chorus. So we put her as Nanette. So she was a black Nanette in the show. It was lots of fun. And she was really good, and so we had a lot of fun with that show. And so that was the last thing we did that year. And we stored, and Tommy Johnson, if you remember her, had given us, for use in the play, an actual 1920s settee and chair set,
Oh my gosh.
which we stored on the loading dock, to our dismay, because I was supposed to return that to Tommy with it all polished up and everything. When I came back, someone had made a decision to clear the loading dock, and they took all of the props from many, many plays, including some from Chang Lee's time too, and out it went. And we lost, out it went. Into the dumpster. I didn't even have a chance. I came back and I was supposed to return the settee to Tommy. That is one of the more gruesome stories, but it is so typical of theater. It's just not something that is easy for a lot of people to understand, that scraps and borrowings and paintings and makeup, and you know this, that's part of the game. And if the students don't get that, I think they get a lot of experience just by participating, and one would hope that they were including them more in building these sets and doing this makeup and doing the designs. And sometimes I wish that that was a bigger component, because I think all people who go into theater need to have that grounding. They need to know what gels go into the lighting and what makes various colors stand out.
Right.
And we used to go through that. One interesting thing is that if you're going to, you can have a very rich palette on your stage. You could have all these wonderful velveteen things in, medieval colors like olive green and grays and everything. But if you put a green light on it, you put it yellow and a green gel, you absolutely make it repulsive. You need other colors in those gels. People need to know that. People need to know how to make their own makeup work. And so even though it took a lot of time that wasn't scheduled in the classroom, it was such a good background for them to have. You need to know the set styles. You need to know so much. And it's nice to get theater kids dirty with the theater. Get them in there and do those things. And that's what the early ECC theater was all about, even to D auditorium. And that coup that we did, if you can imagine a white wall, and this is one of the things, renegade things I did, and I'm sure you had to pay the price for a lot of this. The white wall in D auditorium, when you take the black drapes, and we needed the space for staging things, like in a little night music we had to have. But if you shine any spotlight on a white wall, you're going to destroy everything. So one day I just had everybody paint black all around the wall. And I thought, well, what could they do? They could tell me to paint it back white. But after that, it was much more usable as space. So I've had a lot of run-ins, but I think healthy ones. I think that to understand what theater is requires the whole school, in a sense, to do that. And I was just knowing that the theater is such a valuable tool. I think it's hands down the most human art that there is. And this is my teaching philosophy underneath this. You get everything there. You get the way people dress, you get the stature of people, you don't get the blown up 10 feet tall. You get the actual emotional generation, you have the voice, you sometimes there's singing that goes along with this. You have to know styles of settees and things, you have to know how people sat. You have to go to the museum and find out that sometimes women could not sit in a chair like this. They had too big dresses. They had to have chairs where they could sit like this and display. And in that training, that's why I loved classics, because you are taken out of trying to understand it with your mind to feeling the reality of living in that time. And you'll see that in all the movies now. You can see how they do that. But it's really a wonderful skill for people to do. Plus, they have to plumb the depths of themselves. And they have to take off the cliche. You have to take the cliche away. That, more than anything else, I think was a good teaching for me in English as well. Go beyond the cliche. You'll never get anywhere if you don't find out what powers that. And I had so many, I know you will appreciate this, so many wonderful student experiences as they learned who they were, and as they learned that was okay. Just so many wonderful times. And I've had several women who, you know, a couple of them, who were abused as kids and came to the theater for a rationale to live by and to conquer some of these things. And there have been so many things. I am so grateful for the students who shared their lives, their true lives, not the junk that you get in classrooms, their true lives with me. And I think if anything else about this program was of value to me, it was that I learned so much about human beings. I mean, going to Europe was a great experience too. But I have come out of this experience the richer one. I mean, of all that I've experienced here, they taught me so much, and I remember so many of them.
So it was your students who taught you,
yes,
as well as the characters.
As well as the authors taught me first,
right.
And then other directors taught me, and then the students taught me. And I'll tell you one thing that I brought back so clearly to ECC that I've been teaching for 20 years with this. I had the good fortune of taking a course with Kristen Linkletter, who is the most important coach, one of two most important coaches in speech for the theater. And I took that with Michael Sprague in Holland for Emerson College. And I can't remember a more inspiring time, but it was tough emotionally. I'll tell you one experience of mine there that I carried on with my class, and I always tell classes about it and do this with them. She said, I would memorize 2 monologues. Of course, I memorized a Shakespearean monologue, and I memorized one from The Tempest. And I got up, and we were in a class with mainly French and German, a Portuguese or 2, and a couple of Americans, and some British in Holland. And she said, I had almost gotten to the end. She would put people through gruesome, really wild times. Sometimes she would be coaching one for 2 or 3 hours or 5 or 6. One French actress she didn't let off the hook for 7 hours until this woman released the cliches. Now, I was pretty happy because I was saying, we've only got 2 more days to this class. And then she put me on there and she said, do your monologue. And I started, And it ends with, we are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with a sleep. And that beautiful, beautiful monologue when he's saying goodbye to the theater. And I got up there, and she said, oh, very good, Mr. Shakespearean scholar. I know you know your Shakespeare, you know how to pronounce it, you know all about it. But, why did you pick this? And I said, well, it's a good monologue. She said, no, you didn't pick it because of that. She was just like that. She said, you picked it for a reason, and I want to know in your heart and soul and gut what that reason is. Now, I won't share that, but 5 hours later, she got me for 5 hours too. Shook it out of me, coaxed it out of me, and said, don't hide there. She said, don't hide in your knowledge of Shakespeare, because there's more to it. You are making Shakespeare live again. And ever since then, I've taught all my students in my, when I work for Janus Theater, when I work for Steel Beam, I always put them through a degree of that. They have to know what those lines mean. They have to know what it is to them. She said, no mistake, you didn't pick this. This wasn't just a beautiful monologue. So it was the most exciting thing. Now, I hope that I have conveyed to many people here, including the youth theater, that brilliance of theater. There is no other artistic discipline that is quite that dissecting, And one of my favorite teachers says that the role that you have is not to be considered in any way but a scalpel from which you dissect yourself. And a role is nothing more than a trampoline that you use to spring into yourself. Isn't that beautiful? I am always thrilled. Even talking a little bit about theater, I'm always thrilled to this day, and I'm coaching Laura Schaefer now and Bill Sherry. We're going to do a play again in Elgin because I can't stand to leave the theater and go. And I'm writing a play. Hopefully it will have something to spring into. But I think that's the core of the theater experiences I've had here. And that's why so many of the students I still know, and why when I work outside here, and I've done the Renaissance Repertory, I did stuff at the Woodstock Opera House, I've done stuff for Steel Beam and Janus Theater Company and Elgin Community Theater. I think that's why so many of them audition for me, and I use some of them in all of these plays and Renaissance Repertory. And because they know that they get something out of it, and they know that theater is a great value. It's not just fun and games. It's not just parties. And that's what I've tried to infuse in theater, in the study here, and I've loved every moment of it. And, we did, Children's Theater did Les Mis, which happens to be one of the performances I really prized. You asked me some of the things that I really loved, and Cabaret was another thing that I really prized, because those plays have guts and have humanity in it. And if there's anything we need in this mechanical, technical age, is the antidote of live theater. It's in human scale. It is not a mechanical, technical thing. Movies are not, students are always amazed when I tell them that, well, movies are not the art of the actor. That's the art of the director. They pick your shots and they take you through it 20 times and they pick what they want to show. On stage, the theater is so big that the director could get up and say, stop, but you'll keep going because you're going to give what you're going to give regardless of the director. So the stage is the place for an actor to shine, and he has to keep that investigation of himself and his character up for so long that it makes an impact, and you'll never forget the stage. You might forget a movie that you act in, but you won't forget the stage. So that's a little bit toward the end of what I was going to say about this, but that has been the reason why you put up with so many hassles, I know, in the theater, is because there are moments of true brilliance. I've seen this happen in our shows, and I've, like Taming of the Shrew, the show that I retired with, there were some fascinating presentations of characters that I'd seen Taming of the Shrew many times. But there were additions that the students made and probings that they were making that were truly individual and truly worth seeing. It added to my sense. And, you know, I did several Shakespeare's because of all plays that digs a lot out of you. And I was so happy to see that the students would come to grips with it and present some things that were, okay, it wasn't Ian Richardson, and it wasn't, you know, it wasn't Anthony, it wasn't any of those people. It was them who discovered something to say about these characters.
And that's where the meaning is.
That's their meaning. Right. And that's what we work to accomplish. So the Shakespeare shows that I did were probably my favorites, because no matter what you do to screw up a show, those lines are going to live. Those lines are going to live. And for a young actor, and I did some of these things for Janus Theater Company too, and really enjoyed getting talent from Chicago. And to go into a rehearsal and know you're going to hear to be or not to be, that is the question, you know, and to know that you're going to live 2 months with that is better than going in with a jokey kind of funny sex comedy, which means nothing to anybody because it's all cliche. And you're going to hear these lines and you're going to be bored by the time you finish 2 weeks. You know, I've had that experience in the community. Oh, I don't want to hear any more jokes like that ever, you know. But they've done a good job acting it, but they've come away with nothing but rubber stamp that the society has given. This is fun, and these people will like to eat and drink while seeing this play, and they don't have to think. That's never what I wanted in theater. I always wanted thought.
And is that one of the distinctions then between an academic environment and what we do with directing plays and student plays and other kinds of environments?
Yes, absolutely. The wonderful thing is, and I don't know if this is from a point of view of somebody trying to fund this, but the wonderful thing is I had not, because of you guys, I didn't have to worry about box office. Oh my gosh. I did have to worry about it at some of the other places, and I did have to do some things that were jokey funny and know how to do that. I could make a joke work, but I wouldn't trade the times of struggle in here, in this room, in that place, because the encounter with the play, it wasn't going to be a play that they would see very often. They'd probably have to go to Europe to see a couple of these, and they, you know, but when these authors come on, they'll know something about what these authors are trying to do. Plus, then they can go to a drama class and understand what's going on. If they don't have that, a play is a play, you know. But if they don't understand what's being, I always like to say this too, to myself and to them, what is the price that this character had to pay to do this? And I think that's a valid question later on for literature classes. But a literature person alone has to be real sensitive to get there, or they have had to have some experience in theater. You can do it two ways. And there's some very sensitive, wonderful literature students who know right away. But a lot of students in there miss because they haven't felt the reality of what these characters, and they can be in novels too, because there's lots of drama in novels. And I think the theater program funds that. And the theater program can fund not so much poetry, but it can give some poets a little kick, you know, because there's a lot of drama in modern poetry too. So, and short stories certainly. And I think for anybody going into films, it's good to have this stage training so that they know what they can bring to the theater, to the movies, because that's a whole different matter. Yes, I think I was lucky not to have to worry about box office. I was lucky to be able to be, now, you know, I've had problems because suddenly I'd be in a classroom that was empty, you know, rehearsing, and I wouldn't have scheduled it. I would be in the hallway. People would say, "When are you getting this crap out of there?" But fortunately, ECC was not as pedantic as it could have been. And if it was, I think I challenged it a bit. But it can't be, it has to be, and that's what I like about it, is it is a real challenge. By the way, when we were planning that new theater, which was absolutely a wonderful gift to the community, and that black box, which I loved working in.
So could we talk about
Yes.
the whole envisioning the visual
Right.
Performing Arts Center?
And you were
that
such a
did,
part of that.
And talk
John
to us
Slauson
about
and,
the,
yeah.
the black box and how you envisioned
Oh,
that
yeah.
and the center stage.
The black box, it was fun. I talked to
Which we
you
call the second space.
with the
right?
second space. Yes, right. I loved it because, and I talked to you about this too, I could come from the cold of Elgin, from the winters here, or from the summer heat, or whatever, and go into that black box, and it's totally available for my mentality to stretch out in. And you allowed classes to be in there, of mine off times. And I could shut the doors, and the students would be much more sensitive. We do a lot of exercise work there too, and a lot of monologuing and things like that. And that gave them a break from seeing America, from seeing their problems. Oh, Polly, it was the most wonderful time. You could just expand into that space because it could become everywhere. Like it says in the Tempest, this little island everywhere, So yes, that for me was, and thank goodness that most of the time you made sure that I got scheduled in there for acting classes. Oh, that was so good. And then for rehearsals, it was wonderful. The other space, I think I and John had talked about it, and I had expressed my vision to you of having vomitoria. So it was like a Shakespearean theater, and it had like the levels, and although it has a proscenium arch, the stage comes up and down, so you have lots of surrounding spaces. In a way, it was imaged forth by my view of the Globe Theater, and I built that sort of selfishly. I didn't build that, but I sort of put my saying in there because I thought, boy, it would be my dream to own this theater, do this. And I wanted to tell you one more thing about it. I enjoyed our little group that planned this together. I never thought I would be able to do this. You're here in grad school, oh, read this book on planning a theater, but you never, how many directors get to even have a little input in? And we've got a lot of input in, and there's still some things that should be worked out, but what we got is wonderful. We can work, every theater has its, and I think I told you too that tempering an auditorium was very important to me. When you've got an auditorium, and Ian Richardson taught me this in Stratford, England, and he taught as well as the rest of the class, and he said, now in here, this old theater, we're going to be building a new one, but it won't be like this old one. And he said, you can hear centuries of players. You can hear the emotions that have been sacrificed here. You can hear all that. There are concentric circles of tempering of human stories and human beings here. And he said, now be quiet just a moment. Listen, this was an old theater in Stratford, and you heard this. You heard the creativity. You heard the human voice, even though you didn't hear anything, but a wonderful tempered auditorium. When we went in there, every theater piece we do in there is adding to the layers of meaning. Now that may sound a little esoteric, but I really do believe that. And when you go into an old theater, there's a moment, if it's all quiet, when all the little corners speak. And that's what I love about here. It's finally beginning to take on a little temper. And the black box has certainly done that. So my hope for ECC is that it will work itself back into a true sacrifice of theater. Theater was never meant to be non-religious. It's not religious in standard form, thank goodness, but it is religious. And it explores the human spirit. I hope it comes back to that. It hasn't always been that way since. I think the new teacher is good for him, but sometimes that element is downplayed, and it should never be. That's the center of theater. That isn't an extraneous thing. That's something you can't sacrifice. You can do theater in a barn, you can do theater in a room, but you can't sacrifice that. And we have this beautiful space. Let's hope that it's still used to expand the student's vision of life and himself and humanity. So yeah.
You retired in 1999.
Yes.
Can you tell us about what prompted your decision and what you've been doing since then?
Yes. What prompted my decision was that I had been teaching in the mornings, and when I lived in Dundee, running back to Dundee and then coming back for rehearsals in the evenings, almost always. And I had moved closer on McLean Boulevard to do that here, and that was much better. However, I was still there, and then here most of the evening and here most of the day, and I just thought, I'm doing kind of two jobs, and I love it. I never would not have done that. And it was very stimulating. However, I felt it was time just to leave the, I don't know, I wanted to explore other things, and I did do part-time teaching after that and enjoyed that. But it was a lot different part-time teaching because I could enjoy it. I mean, and I did enjoy this in a different way, but it was a constant. But a class now and then is fun. I love that. And I had, I even taught some German for Bridget a couple of semesters. I think you might have known that. I was scheduled in to do that. And then I have directed for a lot of other theaters since that time.
You've been
Yeah.
directing all the time.
Well, I have so many plays. When I looked at all, I didn't know if you wanted any, visuals, but I just picked some of the plays that I really liked and the posters. And this doesn't have to be on there. This is a view of the cast of The Tempest, the very first Shakespeare I did in Elgin Community College.
We will scan this.
Pardon?
We will scan this if you'll let
Oh,
us.
okay. And this went into Chicago to a little theater called Body Politic at that time, and we appeared in a Chicago parade. This little group here. That was very early in my career. That was, when we were, we were still.
Downtown.
That was we were. And that is filmed outside because we rehearsed The Tempest outside. Here's one of my friends who was in that cast. She's still acting and she's acting in Washington, D.C. She acted at the Folger Library. So she's one of our students, Ruth Neville. And here's one, he's played Caliban in that show.
Could you hold up the one, the Good Woman of Szechuan?
Yes.
That.
I have extra copies of this.
Talk about that.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, and Chung Lee did all the set paintings there. And
Tell us about Chung Lee.
okay. Well, it was a wonderful thing. I think Gretchen Roach, I think that was her last name at that time, got us a wonderful visiting scholar from China who was a painter, plus he was a set designer for Beijing Opera. And he stayed here 2 years, and he was quite delightful. He addressed a lot of the classes, and we had a chance to talk together, travel a bit around together, and I didn't know anything about really Chinese theater, so he kind of filled me in, and he knew about Western theater, however, and he had done many, many sets, and we gave him as much, money as we could. And he painted some wonderful scroll work, big shades, how high, 10 or 15 feet, and you could roll them up and down and change sets that way, and were brilliantly done. And he did that as well for Man of La Mancha. He fit that D auditorium with a set of stairs and said I did a couple of shows with him. The two most important were Good Woman of Szechuan, which is an interesting play because we discussed it in terms of political power. In this play, a woman takes over a business, a family business, and everybody comes and soaks off her. She is warm-hearted, and she gives her relatives, she gives people, oh yes, go ahead, and she gives them entitlement, and she gives them money, and she's going broke. So she goes away, but coming back as her alter ego, but as her also is Shente. Her name was Shweta. Shente and Shweta, they're the same person. And she comes back, and this time she's tough. She says, you're not getting this. We can't afford this. You'll run our business bankrupt. You don't get entitlement for everything. You have to work, and sincerely work. You just don't get to eat off me. She straightens everything up. I love that because that's exactly what politics is like today. I mean, and how to bring both of those together was Brecht's problem. How does the government, he symbolized this by this play, how does the government be strict enough to not make weak beggars? And how is it lenient enough to help somebody with a broken leg or whatever, you know? So,
could you give us some reflections on your 33 years of teaching at ECC?
All right. Probably the main thing for me was that ECC has kind of a song for me, kind of a melody. This room has a certain melody to it. I really enjoy having taught here and in this room, and certainly I love the stage. But whenever I think of ECC, now I'm not thinking of all the new parts, which I don't know, but it also had for me a security too about it. I think one of the things that made it possible to stay was when they said you could bring your mate, when they finally said you can bring your significant other. That was wonderful to me, and all of you meant it. I mean, no matter what your personal feelings were, you gave people a chance to expand, and that's what I want in the theater too. I want people to expand and be who they are. And this school allowed that because the people had good hearts. And I think ECC taught me that there are a whole lot of good-hearted people around who are not wishing you evil. And if they don't agree with you, they still love you. And I really appreciate that. I couldn't have asked for a finer school to be with at this point. That's my final reflection on that.
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Terry. We commend you. You have been the director in the center, helping your students find a rationale to live by, to plumb the depths of themselves. And we thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.